It's amazing how much time in your marriage you spend yelling, "What?" at each other from different rooms. Well, friends, now when I think about it, Trixie has a funny way of talking to me recently. She starts almost every conversation with, "Are you even listening?" Well, I can tell you this, that I've been diagnosed with what I think the GP said to me was a rare kind of selective hearing. See, every time Trixie tells me to do the washing up or the hoovering, things like that, I don't seem to hear her. Somehow. It's not that I don't want to, it just, I don't hear her. I can hear every word from Jurgen Klopp's press conference on YouTube, but just not the wife. What a shame that is. Well, friends, how has your hearing been lately? I hope not as bad as mine. Now, is everyone else here diagnosed with some sort of selective hearing? But seriously now, imagine how hard it would be, for instance, in a relationship when you talk to your spouse and he or she hardly talk back to you. And you wonder, are they really listening to me? Or same with the children, you talk to your child and he or she doesn't reply or say anything, and you're like wondering what kind of relationship that could be, if you can call it a relationship. Very, very hard. Now, yet it's exactly this is what happens in our relationship with God. When we talk, for instance, about prayer, we assume it's a one-way road. Now, God doesn't just want to listen to us. He wants to speak to us too, which means He would love it for us to listen to His voice. Now, imagine the God of the whole universe longing to speak to you and me. Yes, He does. But I get a feeling that often our selective hearing somehow filters His voice, as in not for the better, but for the worse. We don't seem to hear His voice. We don't seem to immediately say, "Here I am." Now, it's interesting to see throughout the Bible the different ways in which God uses to talk to us. In the beginning, for instance, in early occasion in books of Exodus, God talks through Moses, in this instance, through a burning bush, Exodus chapter 3. He talks in direct and in audible voice. We have Genesis 22, then throughout the book of Exodus, and then Acts chapter 8, for instance. God talks to us through another person, 2 Samuel chapter 12. A donkey, Numbers chapter 22, through visions, Acts chapter 10 and chapter 16. God talks to us through dreams, the book of Daniel chapter 4. Through the circumstances, Acts chapter 16, through prayer, Luke 6, and of course the promptings of the Holy Spirit. Now, a quick tip here. It's important to understand that the focus for us should not be on the means of how God speaks to us, but actually our focus should be on the reality that He does speak. Now, the Bible tells us that God never changes. He is the same yesterday, today, tomorrow, and forever. Now, God spoke in the past, He speaks today, and He will surely speak tomorrow, but He will use different ways of going about it. He will use whatever means necessary to get His message across. He longs to have a relationship with us, but it has to be a working relationship. He doesn't want to leave us in the dark. And yet, for many of us, whether as individual believers or sometimes as churches, there is silence. Now, surely there are plenty of prayers going up or wanting to go up, but there is no voice. It seems to come down. What is happening? Is it true that we do not hear God's voice sometimes? Or do we take the time to figure out if it was Him in the first place and then, start philosophizing about it and then forget? Or are we being selective listeners? Or are we, in the worst situation, hardening our heart by closing our ears? Now, a long time ago, there was someone who heard a voice but couldn't figure out where it came from. Now, join me as we go back to the first book of Samuel, chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. Let's read together. I'm going to be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. Now, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread, and at the time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, lie down." So he went and lay down. Now the Lord called again, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli again and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son, lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, verse 7. And the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. So the Lord called Samuel again a third time. And he got up and went to Eli again and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore, Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And verse 11. The Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle." A very well-known story, but what's really happening here? And what do we get as a lesson for today? God is clearly reaching out. He is speaking, but who is listening to him? Not many. See, years ago, Eli used to listen. He used to listen and act upon what God would tell him, what God had shared with him. But later on in life, he changed, and not for the better. He listened all right, but he would not act. Perhaps he'd become too complacent, too comfortable. He had become selective in his hearing, and not for the better. See, over the years, he had turned from a fearless leader into a people's pleaser. He had turned from a respected prophet into a weak politician. What a shame. God would speak, but he would pretend. Sometimes he didn't listen, or he would come up with excuses. Now his sons were worse. It was their job to serve the Lord and his people. Remember, there was no kingdom at the time in Israel. But they had shunned God and couldn't care less if he spoke or not. See, their father was not a role model, so they just went ahead and they abused the power that had been given to them. God would speak, but they would not listen. Their hearts had hardened, and the hardening of hearts, dear friends, is a gradual process. And there we have our teenage boy named Samuel. The meaning of the word we know from Hebrew. God is hearing, right? God listens. He genuinely does not recognize God's voice, yet to his credit, he replies, and he's the only one who says, "Here I am." Now, dear friends, where do we stand today with our spiritual hearing? Hearing God's voice in the different ways that he chooses to speak to us. Now, when God speaks, are we listening at all? And if we are we perhaps being selective? What can we learn from the story about the boy Samuel when God spoke to him? I believe we can learn how to improve our spiritual hearing a little bit. So how can we? Just 3 tips. There's always 3 things. Number 1, do expect God to speak. Please. Often, like Samuel, we don't expect God, that God, can or will speak to us. Now, please, it might not happen that God will speak to us in an extraordinary way, like he talked to Adam and Eve when he said, "Why are you hiding?" Most of the disciples actually didn't expect that Jesus would be resurrected. Most of them didn't even believe when he said that he will meet them in Galilee. They couldn't believe a man that after all, he had been arrested and crucified, right? How could they believe him? We don't think sometimes that he's going to show up and speak to us during our lifetime. Sometimes we don't think it's possible. But the truth is, he does talk to us and will do so even in the most unexpected circumstances of our lives, dear friends. And please remember that when we assume that we can't hear God's voice, that is when the hardening of hearts happens. And it's a gradual process. Another way we can improve, secondly, our hearing is to eliminate unnecessary distractions. Now, we can't remove all the distractions in our lives. I suppose at this day and age, it's becoming increasingly impossible. It's kind of a curse of the modern times, the postmodern times, if you will. But if we just made an effort, we can help ourselves, with the distractions. I certainly suffer from being distracted, and I really, really need to work hard on that. And I need prayers on that, especially as God has called me to be a pastor and a leader. Now, many of us probably just need to turn off the television or, social media, Facebook, Instagram, unplug our Wi-Fi sometimes to focus on listening to God's voice. Because it so happens that the hardening of hearts happens gradually, and we don't want to do that. So remember to eliminate unnecessary distractions in your life. And thirdly, we need to respond immediately and appropriately. Now, when God speaks, it does require a response from us. Tell him, "God, here I am." Something that when Albulena, since she was a baby or she learned how to speak, I guess, I don't remember how, when she was probably 1 year old or something like that. But even until now, she's 5 and she's growing. And of course, I still carry her. I guess we've spoiled her a little bit, but when I carry her and I have her over my head, it's become like a daily story, So I ask, "Albulena, where are you? I don't see you. Where are you?" And she says, "Here I am, here," And that's so sweet when she does that. But how wonderful it is to let God know, "Look, God, here I am. Here I am." Many times we think that God just wants to give orders to us. That's not true, dear friends. You will find sometimes where you really hear God say to you, I love you. Do not be afraid. I am here with you. But even that's all you hear, which I think it's pretty awesome, right? God telling you that I love you. It still requires a response. It prompts a response from you, doesn't it? It leads you to draw closer to Him. Because otherwise, dear friends, remember, the hardening of hearts is a gradual process, and we don't want that. Now, the Bible gives us the appropriate way to respond when God speaks to us, and we have it here. We see where God speaks to an individual who is very, very, very young in age. He's at the age where a lot of our teens in our Ringway Church are at. And the response was, here I am. That's what Samuel said, even before knowing it was actually God who spoke to him. Imagine God calling your name. Like calling Julian, Trixie, Albulena, and so on and so forth. And us responding, here I am. It's a significant statement. It means that the hearer is attentive, not only with their ears, but with their whole body, and most importantly, the heart. Now, when we hear God speaking to us, I hope and pray, dear friends, that this is our response. Here I am. And this is what Samuel did when God was talking to him. And in the end, he said, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Now, it can happen, dear friends, that you can worship God, but not know Him really, at least not know Him intimately. And this is symptomatic of many who are born in the church. Now, I happen to be a first-generation Christian, an Adventist Christian. But here we have, for instance, in verse 10, Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Now Samuel had been worshiping the Lord, it says, in the sanctuary. This is chapter 1, verse 28, right? He had ministered before the Lord, verse 1. So he was assisting in the priestly duties without knowing Him. Secondly, you can hear God speaking, but not recognize that it is actually God. Now, we may not recognize God's voice the first time we hear it, and that's fine, that's fair. It wouldn't surprise me if you who are watching this, probably some of you have never heard God speaking, because you expect the voice to come in an extraordinary way. But perhaps, I think those of you, and I think many of you, are wise to recognize that God chooses creative ways. And perhaps you identify it as a conscience or in your thoughts. That's how the Holy Spirit talks through us. Now, number 3, sometimes a mentor, a friend, can be a church elder, it can be brother or sister believer, it can be any, they can help us learn to recognize and respond God's voice. Eli here recognizes what is happening. And, we have to give credit to him. He instructs Samuel on what to say if this happens again. You can imagine the drama in Eli's mind or heart. He clearly notices that, the Lord is now calling Samuel. The Lord is not calling him anymore. But yet Eli does recognize, and he says, listen, he says to Samuel, it is God. It is God. I know that voice. It is God that is talking to you. It is the Lord. Now, though Samuel is already well aware now, of course, by this time that God has spoken to him, in verse 18, this is after the story, right? Eli confirms to him, that is God. Now, remember, a mentor, somebody can help us recognize and respond to God's voice. Another point is we must come before God as humble and obedient servants. Now, if we want to hear what He's saying, and I think that attitude, the right attitude is important, is paramount. It's quite possible to hear, right, without listening. We know that. In each of the 4 Gospels, Jesus quotes Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, to explain His reason for teaching in parables. There's the answer. Isaiah 6, verses 9 and 10. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of these people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. God can speak even through a donkey. But the question remains if we are ready to respond to Him. If we are not ready, what use is there? What is it that God has been saying to you recently, dear friends? How is your spiritual listening today? Are you healthy in this essential part of your life? Maybe God has been calling your name to ask Jesus to come into your life. Perhaps a second time, again, and more truthfully so. Maybe God has been speaking to you about sin in your life and about things that you need to sort out in your life. Maybe He's been telling you to be kinder to your spouse, more attentive, caring to your parents, and a better role model for your children. Maybe God has been telling you to stop holding grudges from your fellow brother and sister in the church that you have known for years. Maybe God has been telling you to apply that Matthew 18 principle and finally go to that brother and sister in the faith. Talk it out. Pray together. End the story and move on. Maybe He's been telling you to finally start that small group, whether it's a Bible study or a cooking club, whatever it is, whatever, social setting. It can be on Zoom, yes, I'm glad you asked. But invite somebody new. Maybe God has been speaking to you about being involved in an outreach involvement in the church. Maybe to give the prayer meeting a chance, attending it. Maybe to be more intentional on what you post on social media, etc., etc., etc. What will it be? Will you listen? I pray that you will. Will you pretend to listen? I pray and I hope that you won't. Will you listen and do nothing about it? I hope, again, you won't. Or will you listen and say, here I am, and do something about it? Today, please, dear friends, do not cover your ears. If you do, remember, it will harden your hearts, and that is a gradual process. Today, the Creator of the universe wants to talk to you. Maybe tell you something to do something, but maybe just to say, I love you. Do not be afraid. I am with you. You are not alone. Now, He will do it in different ways. He will probably do it through a family member, through a friend, a brother and sister in the church, through a complete stranger. But He will do it because He longs to have a relationship with us. Please listen to His voice today. And my prayer is that we always get to say to the Lord when He talks to us and mentions our name, and then we reply, here I am. Amen. God bless you.